With that simple task of parenting, that threefold simple task, let me then give you two rules. And I think that if you will establish these two rules, that everything will be fine. Can you imagine that? Only two rules for parenting? That's a lot better than that 18 things you got on the refrigerator, right? Just two rules. I think you can do every one of these. I think they're simple, and I think you can go with it. Rule number one, these are household rules. Rule number one, children will obey the parents. That's a good enough rule, isn't it? You could almost say rule number two, refer to rule number one. But that's not what I'm going to say. But that's just a rule. The children are going to obey the parents. We're not going to question, we're not going to decide each infraction whether or not they were going to obey, but they're going to obey the parent. What's the punishment going to be for not obeying the parent? I don't know what it's going to be. It's going to be dependent upon what the circumstances were. But there will be some molding that will take place. There will be that banner of correction that's going to come out when the children have not obeyed the parent. And if that is just the standard in your home, that the children are going to obey the parent, then you will save yourself a lot of agony, and you'll also save yourself a lot of breath, because you don't have to go over it every time. You know what the standard is in this home, don't you? It is you're going to obey the parent. And we've set that all the way from the beginning in your birth. Here's the standard. And I think just a few things I'd like to add to that, especially for those of you who have younger children. If that is your standard, then I'd encourage you to drop something that many of you may have. Drop the count to three rule. I don't know if you've ever done that or not. But if you've ever done that, one, I know how it goes. First of all, think of the logic to it. I want you to obey me after you disobey me for a while. That's sort of what you're communicating, right? You are free to disobey me for a while, but not for long. Well, I don't want that in my home. I want them to obey right now, especially because there are some times in which it could be a life or death matter, right? I mean, you got the little 3-year-old running out to the street, and the car's coming, and you say, stop. 1, 2, and by 3 years old, they're already used to, I don't really have to stop when she says stop. I can keep going for a while. And you ingrain that in them. So I would encourage you, drop that, because it always goes like this. 1, 2, 2.5, 2 3/4. Because we as the parent don't even want to obey our own rule, that the children obey the parents. So just make it simple and cut all the decision making and the counting and all that kind of stuff. Save counting for the math class, and just leave it to you're going to obey the parent. And I think there's another habit then you're going to have to drop, and this is the inconsistency habit. You have to obey me sometimes, and you'll have to test it to see whether or not this is one of those times. That doesn't work, does it? And I might say, I'll pick on moms later, but I might say that dads tend to be worse at this than moms. That dads sometimes, they're so short-tempered at times. They've had a long day at work, and they got caught in traffic on the way home. And, the kid just does the slightest little infraction, and boom, go to your room. You're grounded for 3 weeks. And then at other times, the kid gets away with everything. And dad just sit back there, is changing the channel. Don't worry about him. He'll grow out of it, right? Got to be a little more consistent than that. Dads and moms, in your own rule, and look at it, and just go with it. And then, certainly, if you're going to have an obey your child, obey your child, how's that? If you're going to have an obey the parents rule, then you better do some communication with your spouse, because mom and dad aren't always going to agree on something that was communicated, right? But it's already been communicated. So you're going to have to figure out how to work with that. And if you have over and over and over again in which mom's going one way and dad's going another way, then you got lots of problems in your house. Now, it's going to happen every now and then that one parent is going to blurt out something that the other parent wouldn't have gone with, but The obey your parent rule is more important than getting all that right, unless, of course, it's one of those times in which you need to say, I'm sorry, I blew it. Let me back up on this. What I really want you to do is, and you can do some of that, but you need to be careful that your kid doesn't play you against one another, and that can happen so quickly, can it? So rule number 1 is children obey your parents. Here's rule number 2, is children will not have a temper tantrum. No temper tantrums allowed. I think if you set those 2 rules, 2 simple, basic rules, all your problems will go away. I just imagine in your house if there was never a temper tantrum and they always obeyed you. You wouldn't have come tonight, right? But they don't always obey you. And sometimes when they disobey you, there's a temper tantrum. And sometimes it's even an embarrassing temper tantrum. Now, I'm not saying they have to be happy. They don't have to be happy about it. That's not one of the rules. You can be as upset about it as you want to be. You just can't have a temper tantrum. You can you can go to your room and cry. You can go to your room and cry for 30 minutes if you want. You can go to your room and you can, pound the mattress, whatever you want to do. You can hold your breath till you faint in your room. I don't care what you do, but you're not going to have a temper tantrum. We don't allow temper tantrums in our house because temper tantrums, they throw the whole world upside down and they cause so much chaos in your home that I'm convinced that it is something that you just say, we don't allow that. Other parents might allow their kids to have a temper tantrum, but we don't allow our kids to have a temper tantrum. You have to obey us. And, sometimes as we think about this, and I mentioned they don't have to be happy about it, and they certainly don't. And there are many parents who set as their goal the happiness of their children. And I think if you do that, you're going to have lots of temper tantrums. It just doesn't work to have the goal is, I want you to be happy. I mean, you're not happy, right, all the time? And it's just you're destined to a miserable life for you and your children. But emotion here is not the enemy. They will get angry, right? That's okay. You can be angry. In fact, I think there are times when you and I ought to get angry. I think there are times when our kids ought to get angry. I think we ought to allow that anger to go. It's just that you better be careful how you do it. Remember the scripture says, be angry and do not sin. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. And there will be that anger that comes up, or whatever the emotion is, hurt or tears or whatever, depending on who your child is. But that emotion is not the anger, but the proper expression of that emotion is so important as it comes along. And so a temper tantrum, what does it do? It draws attention to themselves, right? And number 13 there, I am convinced that the child cannot be allowed to draw attention to their unhappiness with their tantrum. I said with their tears there. It should be, let me get that right. They cannot be allowed to draw attention to their unhappiness nor their tears. Don't cry these crocodile tears so that grandma will come running and say, I never have been able to control your daddy. He's always been misbehaved. I'm so sorry he treated you this way. And they get grandma wrapped around their finger. They get, the people in the store or whatever it is. And we allow anger, we allow hurt, we allow crying, all those kind of things. You just can't use it to draw attention to yourself. And so I think that a temper tantrum then has to be very swiftly disciplined, because really a temper tantrum is a sign of rebellion. And you say, I don't allow this rebellion. You're rebelling against the obey your parent rule. And I'm not going to let you rebel against this rule. It is a rule that is hard and fast in our home. And so if this sign of rebellion comes, you say, we got to deal with this one. If we don't deal with anything else, we got to deal with this one. It is unacceptable. We've got to deal with it swiftly. And I think that swift removal from watching eyes makes a temper tantrum unfruitful. And do you know that a child is very calculating? They know what kind of payment they're going to get from their behavior, right? And if there's no profit in it, if it doesn't help achieve their goal, if there's no fruit in it, they won't do it. And so from a very early age, I'm talking, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it is, you don't allow your child to have that temper tantrum. Rather, if they go into that mode, you immediately, depending on how young they are, you take them, you put them off in the other room where they can cry, they can scream, they can be, whatever it is they want to do. Put them somewhere they won't hurt themselves. If they need a padded room, build a padded room, whatever it takes. But you can't do this in public. You can't do it in front of mom. You can't do it in front of dad. You can't do it in front of your brother and sister. You can't do it in front of your dog. Nothing. Nobody's going to see a temper tantrum. That rule might cost you someday, because your child is going to figure this out, and they're going to test how far you'll go with it, right? And they are going to stage a temper tantrum in the most difficult place for you to remove them. Maybe right in the middle of church, and here it goes. And I remember the story of one kid, he was having a little tantrum, and finally his dad picked him up, put him over his shoulder, and carried him out, and the boys turning around, yelling to the congregation, "Pray for me!" Well, they figure out that there are times when it's hard for you to obey that temper tantrum rule that you've got in there. And so there might be the time you have to leave your meal sitting there at the restaurant, and the rest of the family sitting there, and you had to go out into the car and do a little discipline out there, or you had to leave the grocery cart there in the aisle and come back for it later, whatever it is, that'll happen. But it probably will only happen once if you do this right. And if you'll do away with the temper tantrums and just say, there might be a lot of other stuff we'll allow, but we won't allow a temper tantrum. And we won't allow you to disobey the parents. Now, with that, let me move on into another topic. As I mentioned, I'm giving anecdotal evidence. I'm going to talk about some stuff that I have convictions about, and they're random. So let's move on to another topic that's a little bit different, and that is the undeniable influence of a dad.